When people talk about the things that break a parent's heart, they often mention big moments, like a child running away, or a painful argument, or a mistake that cannot be undone. But in my case, the heartbreak came in a much quieter way. It came in the sound of my sister's footsteps at my front door. Soft. Slow. Almost afraid. Her name is Linda, and she has always been the gentlest person I know. She's the kind of woman who apologizes when someone bumps into her, the kind of woman who smiles even when she's tired, the kind of woman who never raises her voice, not even when life gives her every reason to. So, when she showed up at my house one Saturday morning, her hair messy, her hands trembling, and her eyes filled with something she was trying so hard to hide, I felt something in my chest twist. She said, "I came to check on you." But her voice told me another story. A quieter story. A heavier one. At the time, I didn't know the truth. I didn't know what was happening behind the closed doors of my own home. I didn't know my son, Ethan, my sweet boy, had started treating her like something she wasn't. Something no one should ever be. A servant. I didn't know that each time Linda came to visit, Ethan would hand her his empty plate without asking. I didn't know he would call her from across the room and tell her to get this or bring that. I didn't know he had started seeing her as someone who existed only to make him comfortable. I didn't know any of that. But that morning, when Linda stepped into my living room and stood there, quietly wringing her hands, something inside me whispered. Something is wrong. Something is deeply, deeply wrong. And as I watched her lower herself onto the couch, slowly, carefully, I realized that this moment, this small fragile moment, would be the beginning of a truth I never expected to face. A truth about my son. A truth about myself. And a truth about how love, when left unchecked, can grow into entitlement. I didn't know it yet, but that morning was the day I would have to step in. Not as a mother. Not as a sister. But as someone who had to choose what was right. Even if it hurt. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie. I'm 46 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the strong one in the family, or at least, that's what everyone says. The truth is, I don't always feel strong. Most days, I feel like I'm just trying to keep things together. I have one son, Ethan, who is 14. And like a lot of boys his age, he is in a strange place between childhood and adulthood. His voice is changing. His moods rise and fall like waves. Some days he is sweet and helpful. Other days he barely looks up from his phone, barely grunts when I speak to him, barely tries to understand anything outside of himself. I tell myself it's normal. I tell myself it's a phase. But sometimes, when I see the way he walks around the house, tall, confident, careless, I feel a quiet fear in my chest. A fear that maybe, somewhere along the way, I missed something. A lesson. A warning sign. A moment where I should have said no. My sister Linda lives just 20 minutes away. She never married, never had children of her own. Instead, she poured all her love into me and Ethan. She was there at his birth. She watched him take his first steps. She babysat him when I worked night shifts. She helped him with school projects. She cooked his favorite meals. And Ethan adored her, at least, when he was younger. He used to run to the door whenever she came over. He used to hug her so tightly she would laugh and say, "Slow down, buddy, you'll break me in half." But as he got older, something changed. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't loud. It was slow. Quiet. Like a shadow growing behind him. Instead of hugging her, he would shout from his room, "Hey, Aunt Linda." Instead of asking her how she was, he would ask what she brought him. Instead of sitting with her, he would hand her his laundry, assuming she'd fold it. And Linda, being Linda, did everything with a smile. I didn't see the problem at first. I thought she liked helping. I thought she didn't mind. I thought it was just her way of showing love. But love with no boundaries can become a burden. And I didn't see it happening, not until it had already gone too far. That Saturday morning, as she sat on my couch with her tired smile, I wanted to ask her what was wrong. But something held me back. Something in her eyes said she didn't want to worry me. Something in her posture said she was already carrying enough. So instead, I said, "Let me make you some tea." And she whispered, "Thank you," like it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in weeks. I didn't know it then, but that morning was the first time in a long time she sat in my house without being told to do something. And maybe that's why her hands shook. Maybe that's why her eyes glistened. Maybe that's why, when I walked into the kitchen, she let out a small breath, a breath that sounded like relief. I brought Linda her tea and set it gently on the table. She wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to warm something inside her, something cold and small. I sat beside her and simply watched her breathe. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. After a moment, she said, "I hope I didn't come too early." I smiled. "Linda, you could come at 3 a.m., and I'd still be happy to see you." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, but before I could, I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Heavy. Slow. Ethan. He walked into the living room, tall for his age, shoulders relaxed in that careless way teenagers often have. His hair was messy, his headphones around his neck, and his eyes still half asleep. When he saw Linda, he didn't smile. He didn't say good morning. He didn't even nod. Instead, he pointed at the kitchen counter and said, "Aunt Linda, can you get me the cereal?" Just like that. No, please. No hesitation. No awareness of how rude it sounded. My heart dropped. I waited for Linda to say something. To gently correct him. To remind him she wasn't here to serve him. But she didn't. She stood up slowly, too slowly, and walked toward the kitchen. I felt my hands tighten into fists. I didn't know why it bothered me so much in that moment. Maybe because I had just seen her face, tired and fragile. Maybe because I had just watched her sit down like it was the first rest she'd had in days. Maybe because Ethan didn't even notice. "Ethan," I said quietly. "You can get it yourself." He shrugged. "It's fine. Aunt Linda always helps." That sentence told me everything I had been too blind to see. Always helps. Always. As if it was her job. As if she existed just to make his life easier. As if he truly believed it. Linda returned with the cereal box, and Ethan grabbed it from her hand without a thank you. She gave him a small smile anyway. I couldn't breathe for a moment. After he poured his bowl and walked back to his room, I looked at her. "Linda," I whispered, "does he always ask you to do things like that?" She froze. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to know the truth. Then she tried to laugh it off. "Oh, he's just a growing boy. You know how kids are." But her voice cracked on the word kids. And my heart cracked with it. I reached out and held her hand. "You can tell me." But she gently pulled her hand away. "I don't want to cause trouble," she murmured. And right then, I understood. She wasn't tired because she'd slept badly. She wasn't shaking because of the cold. She wasn't visiting because she wanted company. She was drowning under a responsibility no one gave her, except my son. And maybe me, in a way, by not noticing. A week later, the pattern reveals itself. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. I watched. I listened. I learned things I should have known long ago. On Monday, Linda came over after work. She looked exhausted, but Ethan immediately handed her his backpack. "Aunt Linda, can you help me with homework?" He didn't ask. He didn't check if she was busy. He didn't even say hello first. She sat down with him, even though I saw her rubbing her temples like she had a headache. On Wednesday, she stopped by to drop off a casserole she'd made. Ethan didn't thank her. Instead, he said, "Can you bring it to my room? I'm playing right now." She carried the dish upstairs. On Friday, I caught him calling her on the phone, not to check on her, not to talk, but to ask. "Can you swing by and wash my jersey? I need it tomorrow." Linda, of course, said yes. And each time, I felt something inside me grow heavier. A mix of guilt and disappointment. And a sharp, quiet fear. Where had my son learned to treat someone like this? Where had he gotten the idea that kindness meant obedience? How had he grown into a boy who saw my sister, the woman who loved him more than anything, as someone who owed him? I tried to talk to Ethan one evening. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You know Linda helps you because she loves you, right?" He shrugged. "Yeah. She likes doing stuff for me." "That doesn't mean you can expect it," I said gently. But he didn't look at me. He didn't listen. He just said, "It's not a big deal," and walked away. And I realized then. He didn't understand. Not yet. Not because he was cruel. Not because he wanted to hurt her. But because no one had ever stopped him. No one had shown him the boundary. No one had told him that love is not something you take advantage of. And that responsibility was mine. The moment everything became clear. The turning point, the moment I finally said, "Enough," didn't come with yelling or fighting. It came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Linda had come over to return a dish. She looked pale, tired, and a little unsteady on her feet. She sat on the edge of the couch while I folded laundry. Then Ethan walked in, holding his sneakers. He tossed them onto the floor near her feet and said, "Aunt Linda, can you clean these? They got muddy." She looked at the shoes. Then at him. Then at me. And for the first time, I saw something break in her eyes. A small, invisible crack. The kind that forms after many little hurts, not one big one. She whispered, "Maybe later, honey." But she looked scared, scared to even refuse. Ethan frowned. "Why not now? You're just sitting." Something inside me snapped. Very quietly. Very softly. Like a thread pulled too tight for too long. I stood up and said, "Linda, you don't have to do that." But she shook her head quickly, too quickly. "It's fine, Maggie. I can." "No," I said, louder than I meant to. "No, you can't." And Ethan finally looked up. The room felt still. Like the moment before a storm. Like the breath people hold without knowing. And that was when I knew. This wasn't only about chores. This wasn't only about manners. This was about the kind of man my son was becoming. And I had to step in. The moment hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Ethan stared at me, confused and annoyed. Linda kept her eyes down, her hands trembling in her lap. I took a slow breath. I didn't want anger in my voice. I didn't want fear or judgment. I only wanted truth. Gentle truth. The kind that helps someone grow. "Ethan," I said softly, "your aunt is not here to clean your shoes." He blinked. "I just asked." "She always." "That's the problem," I whispered. Linda stood up quickly, trying to stop the conversation before it went any further. "Maggie, it's all right. Really. I don't mind helping him." But I stepped closer and touched her arm. I know you don't mind. But I mind. She didn't say anything. She simply pressed her lips together and looked away, and in that moment, I saw years of unspoken exhaustion sitting in her shoulders. Ethan crossed his arms. I don't get why everyone's upset. She doesn't care. She likes helping. I turned to him. Ethan, helping someone is different from serving them. And you've been treating your aunt like someone who's supposed to do things for you. He rolled his eyes. You're overreacting. Linda gave him a weak smile, trying to ease the tension. It's okay, sweetheart. Your mom is just tired. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not tired. I'm paying attention. And for the first time, Ethan's expression shifted. A small flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. A moment of hesitation. Like he sensed this wasn't a simple scolding. But he still didn't understand. He muttered, I don't see the big deal, and walked to his room, leaving the shoes behind. When his door closed, the quiet in the house felt heavy. Linda sat back down, and I could see her eyes turning glassy. Then she whispered something she had never said before. I don't want to be a burden. A burden. My heart sank. Linda, you're not a burden. You've never been. But I feel like one, she said softly. And I don't want you to think I'm complaining. I love Ethan. I love helping him. I always have. I know, I said gently. But loving someone doesn't mean you have to let yourself be used. She shook her head, trying to defend Ethan even now. He's just a child. No, I whispered. He's becoming a young man. And how he learns to treat people right now will shape who he becomes. Her eyes lowered, and a single tear fell onto her hand. She wiped it quickly, apologizing even for that. I'm sorry, she murmured. I didn't mean to make things complicated. You're not the one making things complicated, I said. But deep down, I felt guilt rising in my chest. Because I realized that this wasn't just Ethan's behavior. This was also my mistake, my blindness, my assumptions, my silence. For years, Linda had been the one person I could depend on. She helped with babysitting. She cooked meals. She cleaned when she visited, even when I told her not to. She did everything out of love. But love without boundaries creates imbalance. And imbalance creates resentment, even if it's hidden. I put my arms around her, and she leaned gently into me, like someone who hadn't been held in a long time. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, I whispered. She shook her head. You shouldn't apologize. I should have spoken up. Linda, you were afraid to. Her silence confirmed it. A shift in the air. That night, after I walked her to her car and watched her drive away, I stood alone in the doorway, feeling the cool air wrap around me. The moon was bright, and the street was quiet. But inside me, there was a storm. I knew I needed to talk to Ethan. But not with anger. Not with shame or guilt. I wanted him to understand, not to crumble. So I waited until the next evening. He was in his room, lying on his bed, scrolling through his phone. I knocked on the door lightly. Ethan. Can we talk for a minute? He sighed but didn't argue. Fine. What now? I sat at the edge of his bed. He didn't look at me. Maybe he didn't want to hear what I had to say. Maybe he didn't think it mattered. I began quietly. Do you know why I was upset earlier? Because of the shoes, he muttered. It wasn't a big deal. It was to Linda. He froze. Just for a second. I continued, she's been helping you with everything. Things you should be doing yourself. Things you never ask me for. Things you don't ask anyone else for. He frowned, confused. But she always says yes. That doesn't mean she wants to, I said softly. Sometimes people say yes because they're afraid to disappoint someone they love. He looked at me finally. Why would she be afraid of me? Because she loves you, I said. And she doesn't want you to stop loving her. His face softened. I would never stop. I know that. And she knows that. But she still feels responsible for your happiness. She still feels like she has to do things to make you like her. That's not true, he whispered, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. It is, I said gently. And today, when you threw the shoes in front of her, she felt small. She felt like she wasn't family. Like she was someone you expected to serve you. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean it like that. I know, I said. But intention isn't everything. How we make people feel matters too. He looked down at his hands. I didn't know she felt that way. You didn't, I agreed. Because you never asked. And that's what growing up means, learning to see beyond yourself. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, in a small voice, he asked. Did I hurt her? Yes, I said honestly. Not with words, but with expectations. With habits. With the way you've been talking to her. His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a while, real emotion. Not anger. Not defensiveness. But understanding. Painful, slow understanding. I don't want to be that kind of person, he whispered. I know, I said, putting my arm around him. And that's why we're talking about it now. He leaned against me, and for a moment, he was my little boy again, the boy who used to bring Linda flowers from the yard, the boy who used to fall asleep on her lap, the boy who used to say, Aunt Linda is my best friend. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten. But forgetting is not the same as losing. And it wasn't too late to teach him. A quiet promise. Before bed, I asked him one more question. Tomorrow, will you talk to her? He nodded slowly. Yeah. I want to make things right. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small light of hope. Because change doesn't happen in big moments. It happens in small ones. Quiet ones. Honest ones. The next day, I would find out just how much my son had listened. And just how deeply Linda's hurt truly went. The next morning felt different. The sunlight coming through the kitchen window was softer than usual, almost hesitant. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I wondered if Ethan had changed his mind. But then I heard footsteps, slow, thoughtful footsteps, coming down the hallway. He walked into the kitchen with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders a little tense. He wasn't wearing his usual careless expression. Today, he looked serious. Nervous. A boy who wanted to do the right thing but didn't know how. Mom, he said quietly, is Aunt Linda coming today? Yes, I replied. She said she'd stop by to drop off some things. He nodded, then sat at the table, staring at his fingers as he picked at the edge of a placemat. I didn't push him. I didn't offer advice. I wanted this moment to belong to him, not to me. About an hour later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Linda standing there holding a small grocery bag. She had tried to look her usual cheerful self, but her eyes were tired, and her smile was thin. Morning, she said softly. Come in, I replied, stepping aside. When she walked into the house and saw Ethan sitting at the table, her smile grew a little. She always lit up around him, even when she was hurting. Hi, sweetheart, she said gently. Ethan stood up. He didn't mumble a greeting like he usually did. He didn't avoid her eyes. Instead, he stepped closer. Aunt Linda, he began, his voice small, can we talk? Linda blinked in surprise. Of course. She sat down at the table, and he sat beside her, though not too close. He looked like he was trying to gather the courage to speak. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to wipe the counter so they could have privacy, but quietly listening, not to intrude, but because my heart needed to hear what came next. Ethan took a breath. "I'm sorry." Linda's eyebrows lifted slightly. "For what, sweetheart?" He swallowed. "For the way I've been treating you." A soft, painful silence fell across the room. Linda's hands tightened around the grocery bag in her lap. I didn't know I was hurting you," Ethan continued. I thought you didn't mind. I thought you liked helping me." Linda looked down, blinking fast. "I do like helping you. I always have. But I wasn't asking," he said quietly. "I was expecting. And that's wrong." Something in Linda's expression shifted at those words. Her lips trembled. Her eyes glistened. She looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy weight, and suddenly, someone had reached out to lift it. "I never wanted to make you feel like a servant," Ethan whispered. That word, servant, hung in the air. Linda pressed a hand to her chest, as if steadying herself. "Oh, honey. I know you didn't mean harm. But I still hurt you," Ethan insisted, his voice cracking just slightly. She wiped a small tear from her cheek and gave him a tender smile, one that carried years of love. "I was never upset with you. I was upset with myself." Ethan looked confused. "Why?" "Because I didn't say no," she whispered. "I didn't set boundaries. And because I was afraid." He frowned, his voice quiet. "Afraid of what?" Linda hesitated. Then she spoke with a truth she had never admitted out loud. "Afraid that if I stopped helping you, you wouldn't need me anymore. That you'd grow up and I'd fade into the background." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. And they hit Ethan too, harder than I expected. He shook his head. "Aunt Linda, that's not true. I'll always need you." She smiled sadly. "Sweetheart, children grow up. That's how life works. I know that. But sometimes, loving someone makes you afraid of losing them." Ethan leaned forward. "You won't lose me." "I know," she whispered. "But my heart doesn't always believe that." More tears gathered in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. But Ethan reached out and gently touched her hand. "Aunt Linda," he said, voice trembling, "I don't want you to feel that way. Ever. And I don't want to be the reason you're tired or sad. I want to be better." Linda's breath caught. For a moment, she looked at him the way a mother looks at her own child, full of pride, full of heartbreak, full of love. "You're already good," she whispered. "You just need to be aware of how your actions affect others." He nodded. "I understand now. And I'm going to change. I promise." And then, something unexpected happened. He hugged her. He leaned forward and wrapped his arms gently around her shoulders, his face pressed into her hair. Linda froze for half a second, then melted into the embrace, holding him close, her tears falling silently. It was the kind of hug that mended things. The kind that closed wounds but also opened truth. I felt my own eyes sting as I watched them. A small, quiet moment. But one that shifted everything inside our home. The deeper truth emerges. After their embrace, Linda whispered, "There's something else I should tell you." Ethan pulled back. "What is it?" She hesitated, looking between us. Then she took a long breath. "I haven't been feeling well," she said softly. "I'm tired all the time. That's why I've been overwhelmed." Fear shot through me. "What's wrong?" She shook her head quickly. "It's nothing serious. Just stress." The doctor said I need to rest more. I've been doing too much for too many people. Her voice wavered. Including you, sweetheart. Ethan's face fell. I didn't know. She touched his cheek. I know you didn't. And that's why I'm telling you now. I need to take better care of myself. And you need to take better care of your heart. He nodded slowly. I will. Then Linda looked at me. Maggie, I wasn't trying to hide anything. I just didn't want to worry you. You already do so much. But I stepped forward and held her hand. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else, I whispered. Let us take care of you now. Her lips trembled again as she nodded. A shift toward healing. After the conversation, we sat together in the living room. No one spoke for a while. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt warm, like sunlight touching a cold room. Ethan picked up his shoes from the floor and set them aside without asking her to clean them. I saw him look at her hands, small, tired, gentle hands, and I could tell he understood. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't instantly transformed. But he had taken his first step into awareness. And that was enough. That afternoon, Ethan washed the dishes without being asked. He cleaned his room. He even brought Linda a glass of water, placing it gently in her hands. It wasn't the chores that mattered. It was the intention behind them. He was learning. Growing. Changing. And Linda, she looked lighter than she had in months. The days that followed felt gentler somehow. Not perfect, but softer. Like something inside the house had finally settled after months of feeling out of balance. Linda began visiting again, but this time, things were different. This time, she didn't rush to wash dishes or fold laundry. She didn't jump up every time Ethan moved or spoke. She didn't carry invisible weight on her shoulders. And Ethan, he changed in ways I didn't expect. On Monday, when Linda stopped by for a short visit, he opened the door before I could reach it. He smiled, an actual smile, and said, "Hi, Aunt Linda. I'm glad you came." She looked surprised, then warm. "Thank you, sweetheart." He took the grocery bag from her before she could lift it again, and she let him. That small moment, that simple exchange, felt like sunlight filling a dark room. Later that afternoon, Linda sat in the living room, knitting quietly, while Ethan worked on homework at the table. At one point, he paused and looked at her. "Aunt Linda," he said gently, "are you feeling okay today? Do you need anything?" She blinked slowly, as if she wasn't used to being asked. Then she smiled. "I'm all right, honey. Thank you for asking." It was such a small thing. A simple question. But for someone who had spent years hiding her tiredness, it meant everything. A slow, steady shift. Throughout the week, Ethan continued making small changes. He began doing chores without being told. He checked in on Linda through short calls and texts. He asked me more often if I needed help too. Not because he was afraid. Not because he felt guilty. But because he was learning how to see people again. Their feelings, their limits, their humanity. One evening, after Linda had gone home, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, deep in thought. "You know," he said quietly, "I never realized how much she did for me." I sat down beside him. "Most people don't notice love when it's silent." He nodded slowly. "I guess I thought she'd always be there. Always helping. Always saying yes. That's what happens when someone loves deeply," I said. "They give and give, until they forget to protect themselves." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't want her to feel like that anymore." "You're already making a difference," I told him. "Just keep being mindful." He looked at me with an expression somewhere between pride and regret. "I'm going to do better," he said softly. And I believed him. Linda's healing. Even though Linda insisted she was fine, I could tell she was exhausted in ways that went beyond a few nights of rest. Her doctor was right, she needed time, space, and gentler days. So, I started visiting her more often. Not with laundry. Not with requests. Just with company. We sat on her porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip low over the houses. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she stayed quiet. But she always looked peaceful in those moments. One afternoon, while we drank tea together, she looked at me and said, "You know, I didn't realize how much I had lost myself in trying to be helpful." "You didn't lose yourself," I said gently. "You just forgot to put yourself first sometimes." She smiled sadly. "I guess that's true." Then she added, "I'm learning." Slowly. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "I'm here. Ethan's here. You don't have to carry everything alone." Her eyes softened. "Thank you, Maggie. Truly. A new beginning for Ethan." A few weeks later, Ethan came to me with an idea. "I want to do something nice for Aunt Linda," he said. "What kind of something?" He shrugged. "Something that shows her I appreciate her." It took him a few days to plan it, small notes, little gestures, simple acts of kindness. He cleaned her porch. He baked cookies, with questionable results, but full of effort. He wrote her a short letter that said, "Thank you for loving me. I didn't always show it, but I love you too." When he handed the letter to her, Linda read it twice. Then she held it to her chest like it was something precious. She didn't cry this time. She just smiled, a quiet, grateful smile. "You've grown so much," she whispered to him. He blushed. "I'm trying." "I can see that," she said, hugging him gently. For the first time in a long time, Linda didn't look tired. She looked relieved. And proud. A family redefined. Over time, our home found a new rhythm. Linda visited because she wanted to, not because she felt obligated. Ethan asked for help only when he truly needed it, and always with respect. And I learned to see the quiet ways people carry responsibilities, even when they say nothing. I also learned something about parenting. Not every mistake a child makes defines them. Not every flaw is permanent. Sometimes they just need someone to pause their world long enough for them to see clearly. One evening, after dinner, Ethan said something that stayed with me. "I used to think love was people doing things for you. But now I think it's people caring how you feel." I looked at him, surprised by the wisdom in his young voice. "That's a beautiful way to see it," I said. He shrugged with a shy smile. "I think Aunt Linda taught me that." I nodded. "She's always been a good teacher. A quiet, gentle peace." Months later, Linda was stronger, emotionally and physically. She spent her weekends gardening, cooking for herself, taking long walks. She laughed more. She slept better. She found a softness in life again that she had been missing. And Ethan. He kept growing into himself. Not into a perfect young man, but into one who understood kindness, boundaries, gratitude. One afternoon, Linda and Ethan were sitting on the couch, looking through an old photo album. There was a picture of the two of them from years ago, Ethan, still a child, resting his head on her lap. He smiled at it. "I used to be so attached to you." "You still are," she teased gently. He laughed. "Yeah, but now I'm nicer about it." She grinned. "Yes, you really are." I stood in the doorway watching them, two people I loved more than anything. And I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Peace. Relief. And gratitude. Sometimes, families fall into patterns without realizing. Sometimes love becomes unbalanced without meaning to. But if we pay attention, if we listen, if we step in with gentle honesty, healing can happen. Not through force, not through anger, but through understanding, through compassion, through truth, through choosing to do better. And that is exactly what we had done. Life didn't change overnight. It never does. But little by little, our home felt lighter, like a window had finally been opened after months of quiet, unnoticed heaviness. Linda continued to visit, but now she came with ease. She sat on the couch without jumping up every time someone moved. She rested her hands in her lap instead of holding tension in them. She let herself be, not just do. And Ethan, well, he kept surprising me. Some days he slipped back into old habits, the way teenage boys sometimes do. But now, he noticed it. He caught himself. He apologized without being asked. He grew aware of the impact of his actions. One afternoon, when Linda was leaving, he hugged her at the doorway and said, "I'm glad you came today." Her smile in that moment was soft and full. "I'm glad too," she said. I watched them, and a quiet warmth filled my chest. Not pride. Not relief. Something gentler. A kind of peace you feel when a storm finally breaks and the air becomes breathable again. A quiet evening of understanding. A few nights later, I sat alone at the dining table, sipping tea and listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. Ethan came in and sat across from me. "Mom," he said, "can I ask something?" "Of course." "Do you think I really hurt Aunt Linda?" "Like, a lot." His voice was small, uncertain. I nodded slowly. "I think you hurt her without meaning to. But I also think your apology meant more to her than you can imagine." He stared at the table, running his fingers along the wood grain. "I never want to be that kind of person again." "You won't be," I said gently. "Because now you see things you didn't see before." He gave a shy smile. "I guess growing up is harder than I thought." I reached out and squeezed his hand. Growing up isn't about being perfect. It's about learning who you want to be. He nodded thoughtfully, and I could tell the lesson would stay with him, not because I taught it, but because he felt it. Final reflection, a lesson for all of us. Looking back, I realized something important. People don't break from one big moment. They break from 1,000 small ones. Quiet expectations, unnoticed habits, unspoken exhaustion. And healing doesn't come from one big change. It comes from small choices. Kindness offered freely, boundaries respected, love given with awareness. My son didn't become kinder because I lectured him. He became kinder because he understood the heart of someone who had loved him all his life. And my sister didn't regain her strength because she stopped caring. She regained it because she finally let herself receive the same care she always gave. As for me, I learned that stepping in doesn't always mean stepping hard. Sometimes it means stepping gently. Stepping with love. Stepping with truth. Families aren't perfect. We grow, we stumble, we learn. But when we choose to see each other fully, with compassion, with honesty, with patience, we give each other space to heal. And that is what saved us.